Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a stack of sources you provided, and they're focused on, one of the most compelling and frankly terrifying themes in history and current events.
Yeah, it's this idea of the predictable, the inevitable collapse of power structures that are built on secrets.
Exactly. And this is such an essential deep dive because it forces us to move past the temporary shock of these high-profile disclosures.
The files, the lists, all of it.
Right, the shaking of political establishments. Instead, our mission here is to synthesize the logical framework behind why it all happens.
And that's the key. We're looking at why secrecy, when it's used as a foundational building block for power, it's structurally and even mathematically destined to fail.
I love that. So we're analyzing these two powerful metaphors you shared, the logic of the ledger and the logic of the lantern. And they treat truth as a kind of fixed asset, something valuable and permanent, and lies as a debt that must, without fail, eventually be paid back.
And what's fascinating here, what the sources really hammer home, is that this collapse isn't a matter of luck. It's not about great investigative work or even timing. It's a systemic certainty.
So it's baked into the code of the system itself.
It is. It's an embedded accountability. If you build your house on sand, the house is guaranteed to fall. It doesn't matter how good the initial plaster looks.
So let's start with that foundation of sand then. The logic of the ledger. We're talking about the economics of deceit?
That's the starting point. The initial framework is purely financial. Truth is that fixed asset, it's solid, it's immutable. A lie, however...
A lie is a liability. Instantly.
Instantly. It's an undeclared debt on the system's balance sheet. But, and this is crucial, it's not a static debt. It's a debt accruing what we might call compound interest on deceit.
That compounding is the key, isn't it? People think of a secret as, a single cost. You just hide one thing.
But it's never just one thing. That's the trap. If you tell one initial lie, that's your principle, you immediately need, say, 5 more lies to protect it.
And then you need time, energy, resources to manage the paper trail, manage witnesses.
Manage the media narrative, manage the internal fear of discovery. All that effort, it drains resources and attention away from what the system is supposed to be doing.
Its productive function.
Exactly. That compounding expense is the interest on that first lie. So the final settlement of the debt, it's just exponentially larger than what you started with.
So the energy needed to maintain the secret just explodes over time until the cost of the cover-up actually outweighs the benefit of the power you were trying to protect.
That's the economic logic. And this idea isn't just from, modern finance. The sources connect this kind of structural debt to some really ancient wisdom.
Right. You included some primary scriptural sources.
Yes. And if we look there, we see this principle of inevitable disclosure laid out so explicitly. For instance, in Luke 12:23, the logic is simple. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed or hidden that will not be known.
So in that context, the lie isn't just a financial burden, it's a kind of spiritual or universal debt.
It is. It has to be settled in the light. The idea is that the very nature of reality resists being permanently concealed. The material suggests that no matter how deep you bury something, the truth is destined for exposure, because the structure built to contain it is just fundamentally unstable.
Okay, so if the ledger establishes the debt, we have to talk about how that debt gets collected. How does this unstable structure inevitably fall apart?
Right.
This brings us to the mechanism of exposure. This is the logic of the lantern, the light that exposes the debt. This is where we move from the accounting to the actual mechanics of it all.
And this is where we need to introduce the concept of social entropy.
Okay, entropy. We usually hear about that in physics, the tendency for things to break down, right?
Exactly. The measure of disorder. The sources apply this politically. A system built on truth, on reality, requires relatively little energy to maintain because it's already aligned with how things are.
But a system built on lies.
Well, that requires progressively more and more energy. More lies, more surveillance, more bureaucratic hoops, more internal purges, all to enforce a non-reality.
You're constantly fighting against the grain.
Constantly. And eventually, the sheer administrative weight of managing all the lies and covering up the debt becomes so great that the system just locks up. It reaches a point of total structural collapse.
Not from a single bomb going off, but because it just ran out of gas.
It burned itself out. The cost of the ongoing deceit was just too high.
So secrecy isn't just, morally hazardous. It's an unsustainable engineering flaw. I find it so interesting how the sources contrast the different governing philosophies on this.
You really have two radically different blueprints for building a system.
Okay.
On one hand, you have what the sources call the dark logic, which is, of course, famously articulated in Machiavelli's The Prince.
Right, the ends justify the means.
Basically, Machiavelli writes the instruction manual for short-term power retention. He advocates using fear, using secrets, with expediency, getting the immediate result, as the ultimate justification. It's the ultimate ignore the ledger philosophy.
So it's the blueprint for temporary success.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then you have the philosophical counterargument, which directly anticipates this social entropy problem. It comes from Cicero's On Duties.
The officious, right.
Yes, and Cicero argues that nothing is truly expedient if it is not morally right. You can't gain a long-term stable advantage by engaging in systemic deceit.
Because the cost of that deceit, the debt, the entropy,
Will eventually guarantee your destruction. The ledger requires payment, and Cicero's just saying, don't confuse a temporary gain with actual structural stability.
that makes the distinction so clear. Machiavelli optimizes for the now, Cicero optimizes for perpetuity.
Well said.
And speaking of perpetuity, the way this lantern operates is changing, right? Especially with technology. The sources talk about the shifting dynamics of surveillance moving from that classic panopticon model.
Yes, the panopticon, a concept from Bentham, later analyzed by Foucault. It describes a system where the powerful elite were hidden, silently watching the exposed masses.
A structure of hidden power watching a visible public. It was all about the threat of being seen.
Exactly. And that felt like the dominant paradigm for centuries.
But now we're seeing this dramatic reversal. It's being driven by file leaks, by digital disclosure.
The lantern of modern digital disclosure, whether it's journalism, whistleblowers, decentralized information, it's turning the gaze back onto the elite. The powerful structures that believe their methods were permanently secure in the dark.
The watchers are being watched.
They are.
Yeah.
And because of that compounding debt we talked about from the ledger, the public appetite for that exposure is just enormous.
The cost of being opaque is now way too high. And it's not just a theoretical risk, is it? It's a repeatable pattern. If this principle of collapse is so certain, we should see it all through history.
Oh, we absolutely do.
So let's look at those historical precedents and frameworks for accountability that you found in the sources.
We should, because this concept, where the very system designed to ensure permanence is the thing that guarantees collapse, is deeply rooted. The sources highlight this. Chillingly perfect historical mirror for modern anxieties about internal corruption or deep state themes.
And what's that?
The fall of the Praetorian Guard in Rome.
They were the ultimate security system, weren't they? The emperor's personal elite bodyguards.
The absolute elite. They were designed to protect the system, guarantee the stability of the emperor. But because of their unchecked power, their isolation, they became so corrupted that they effectively ended up controlling the emperor.
And eventually controlling the entire state.
Yes.
Give us an example of how they accelerated that collapse.
Well, the ultimate low point came after the assassination of Emperor Pertinax in 193 AD. The Praetorian Guard didn't just assassinate him.
Right.
They auctioned the entire Roman Empire off to the highest bidder.
Wait, they literally sold the throne. They literally sold the throne from inside the system they were sworn to protect to a man named Didius Julianus. It just perfectly illustrates how these internal systems designed to protect power. They metastasize into systems of total corruption and self-destruction.
The system eats itself. It's social entropy in action.
But that example also raises the question that people always ask about these huge scandals. Why does this structural debt take so long to mature? Why do they seem to get away with it for decades?
The sources address that delay. They use the philosophical framework you find in Psalm 73, which is often called the problem of the prosperity of the wicked.
Okay.
And it provides the explanation that, yes, people in high places do seem successful and untouchable for a long time, for a significant season. They prosper, their power structure looks impregnable.
They seem to mock the rules.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But the core insight of that text is that they are ultimately standing upon slippery places. Their success is temporary. Their foundation is inherently unstable because it carries all that ledger debt. The lantern hasn't been switched on yet, but the physics of their position guarantees the eventual fall.
And the indictment isn't just aimed at the individual actors, right? It's structural. It's the whole mechanism of power.
That's where the sources bring in Habakkuk 2 with that stark warning. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed.
Which connects the power structure, a city, an institution, a state, to its foundations.
If the cornerstones themselves are corrupt, if the whole thing is built on exploitation, then the eventual reckoning isn't an accident. It's a necessary demolition. The system is flawed from the ground up.
And when that demolition finally arrives, the sources are very clear that individual accountability remains absolute, no matter how big the organization is.
This is such a crucial modern legal concept, especially for these structures built to protect bad actors. The sources highlight the Nuremberg principles.
Specifically, principle this.
Exactly. This logic established in a modern legal sense that being part of a vast protected system, or just following orders, does not exempt an individual from personal accountability for their actions.
So it effectively says that the organizational shield, the supposed safety of the deep state or whatever you want to call it, it just dissolves when the lantern is turned on.
The individual still owes the debt. The systems of protection are temporary, but the ledger of your actions is permanent.
So we've established the mathematical debt with the ledger and the self-destructive mechanism of exposure with the lantern. This forces us into our last section. What does this all mean for the listener? For the person watching the system wobble, what's the right strategy for living through these great disclosures?
This brings us to what the sources call the strategy of the Watchman.
Okay.
It addresses the necessary role of staying grounded, of preventing a collapse into either panic or, just as damaging, cynicism when the pillars of society are proven to be hollow.
Which is really challenging. It's hard to stay grounded when you realize the foundation you trusted is fundamentally unsound. That's a huge psychological shock.
It is, but the stability of the Watchman comes from intellectual grounding. It comes from understanding the principle that the collapse was inevitable. It was mathematically mandated by the ledger rather than being repeatedly shocked by every new event.
So the watchman sees the entropy coming and doesn't lose their footing.
The goal isn't surprise, it's preparedness. And part of that means defining what we actually want when the ledger is finally settled. The sources draw a very careful distinction here.
Between historical justice and modern movement.
Yes, a distinction between the ancient concept of lex talionis, the simple law of retribution, an eye for an eye, and a more encompassing constructive justice.
Which is different from, say, modern cancel culture.
The sources suggest it's fundamentally different, because that often focuses purely on immediate retribution, immediate shaming.
So how does that difference manifest when the lantern shines?
True justice, according to this framework, requires the lantern to serve a dual purpose. It must, 1, expose the deed, shine the light on the lie, and demand the ledger be settled.
Okay, that's accountability.
But 2, it must also clarify the path forward for the nation or the society. Retribution alone, while sometimes necessary, can be chaotic and destructive. Justice has to provide clear direction and reconciliation. It has to build something stable, not just satisfy the immediate need for punishment.
So the end goal isn't just tearing down the rotten structure, it's making sure the new one isn't also built on lies.
Exactly. The Watchman isn't just an observer of collapse. They are the keeper of the new blueprint. And it's one built on fixed assets on truth, not on compounding debt.
This has been a truly remarkable synthesis. We've mapped the inevitability of secrets failing, moving logically from the mathematical debt of the ledger to the self-destructive mechanism of the lantern, and finally to the necessary response of the watchman.
It's a profound realization, isn't it? Integrity isn't just a moral aspiration. It is an absolute structural requirement for long-term stability. Any deviation from it generates a debt that the universe will eventually collect.
Thank you for sharing the source material with us. It really gives you a much deeper, almost Newtonian perspective on current events. You stop being surprised by the inevitable.
My pleasure. And to wrap up, we spent a lot of time on Cicero's argument against expediency and this theory of social entropy, that systems built on lies require ever-increasing, unsustainable energy until they just collapse.
Right.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider as you integrate this deep dive. If you now understand that relying on expediency guarantees systemic collapse, how does this shift in understanding inform your personal duty in maintaining integrity within the systems you participate in? Whether it's a family, a small business, a community organization, something to mull over as you seek to build structures that last.